Yeah.
And all right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us here tonight for a program about Senator Eva McCall Hamilton for Women's History Month. My name is Valerie Marvin. I serve as the Director of Education and History here at the State Capitol. And whether you're joining us in person or online, thank you very much for tuning in for Capitol Stories. We like to think that the Capitol touches every topic somehow in some way. And tonight we're going to really zoom in on the life of a woman that we frequently mention in the Capitol. She might get a line or two on a tour, maybe a paragraph occasionally. But honestly, sometimes it's easy for us to think of these people as simply having one or two lines of significance and not really think about their deeper impact on not only the Capitol, but on the world beyond. So tonight, I hope you enjoy this story. We're going to be talking about Eva McCall Hamilton, who was known two ways, shall we say. She is remembered today as Michigan's first female senator, the first woman to serve in the Michigan legislature. So she is held up as part of this sort of pantheon of firsts, if you will. In her lifetime, though, she was also commonly referred to as Michigan's lady senator. And that is a complicated term. On one hand, yes, she was a woman, she was a lady, but it also implies that she was totally different from the rest of the senators, that her term in office came with a sort of qualifier, if you will, that I think sometimes was a blessing and sometimes was probably a curse. So we're going to talk more about that tonight, but also delve deeper into not only her time in the Senate, but really her entire life of advocacy. What was this woman about? What did she do beyond serve in public office? And of course, some of you can sleep through the next two slides. You know what's coming. Of course, she was not the first woman to come to our Capitol building. Our current Capitol opened officially on January 1st of 1879, and we know that there were dozens of women working in state government already by that time, including, drum roll please, here's your evening's Harriet Tenney reference, including Harriet Tenney. Thank you, Mr. Van Acker. Including Harriet Tenney, who made history when she became the first woman to serve in Michigan government. And I have to throw this in, not only because she's my favorite, as you all know, but because this picture of her face is a very real reminder that women did not enter government when suffrage happened. That is too often the stereotype we have. And in some ways, Eva embodies that stereotype because she is elected in that first election when women can vote in 1920. No, women were in government for a long time before. Many of them clerking in offices. Their name may not have been on the letterhead, but they were often in offices doing the work day in and day out. So when people came to the Capitol for an appointment, for a meeting, they would have seen women in multiple areas in the building. And by the early 20th century, women are going to make up a majority of many of the department workforces. Now, let's take a break from the Capitol for a second and talk about Eva's background. So Eva McCall was born in Memphis, Michigan, a very small town, if you've never heard of it. It's on the edge of St. Clair and Macomb counties. She was born in 1871 to Anna Pierce and John McCall. She grew up in a farming family. She would refer to herself sometimes as a farm girl later on in life. Her parents were members of the Grange. And I have often wondered what this opened in her mind as far as possibilities, because the Grange was the extremely rare fraternal organization, both fraternal and advocacy organization, that was co-ed. From its founding in the 1870s, the Grange accepted both men and women. Women were not in a separate auxiliary, so this was not the Oddfellows and the Rebeccas that were brother and sister organizations, but separate. No, the Grange included from its inception men and women, and it had specific leadership positions for women within its organization. So there was, for example, state level offices that women would always be elected to fill from the beginning. And of course, if you've grown up on a farm, this may not surprise you, because on a farm, everybody works. Yes, there may be some tasks more associated with dad than mom, but it is all hands literally to the plow, if you will. Now, Eva was one of 7 children. 6 lived to adulthood. She had 4 brothers and 1 sister. And we know she must have been a good student because she continued her education through high school, which was quite unusual at the time. And then she also attended a normal school and took special courses. Now, this is theory on my part here. I think she probably went to Central Michigan, which was then the Central Normal School. The second established in the state, the first was Eastern. Unfortunately, their records are very spotty for the first few years of their existence in the 1890s, which is when she would have been there. But we know that she is living in Mount Pleasant because that is where she will meet her future husband. We also know that she specifically studies to be a physical education teacher. So she was probably interested in what was then called the calisthenics movement. So she does not believe the lies that are being perpetuated by some, that women are physically inferior and should not do physical exercise. This was a big point of contention in the late 19th century, shall we say. Some people felt that if women exerted too much physical energy, that they would drain the abilities of other parts of their bodies. In other words, if a woman was too physically active and dared to exercise, she might not ever be able to reproduce. Sounds a little nuts to us, but there were many, many books published on this topic in the late 19th century. This was one reason that some people argued women should not even go into a college because they would be exerting themselves too much, both physically and mentally, and this would have long-term repercussions for their ability to have children someday. Eva clearly did not believe this. She studied phys ed, and she would work as a phys ed teacher. Now, while in Mount Pleasant, she will meet a young man named C.B. Hamilton. He is living with his aunt and uncle, and he will eventually, with his uncle, have a grocery store. That's interesting and going to be significant in a few years. They meet. They are very socially active. This will set a pattern for their lives together. A lot of their sociability centered on the local Baptist church, where they were members and they were involved in the young people's circle. And they were also leading these groups. So you can see them popping up multiple times in newspaper notices. You will also see up at the top, they will marry. We actually have a copy of their marriage registry there. They did go back home where Eva was born and raised. She was married in Memphis, but their marriage was registered in Isabella County. So they were clearly, they were considering Mount Pleasant their home by this point. And this is where they would live for about the first 5 years of their marriage until in 1898, they relocated to Grand Rapids. And this is where they would spend the rest of their married life. Now, they would live in the area that is today known as Heritage Hill, though, of course, this would have been a brand new up-and-coming neighborhood at that time. And in this neighborhood, today, we have a wonderful collection of preserved historic homes. Unfortunately, theirs is not among the survivors. Their home does not make it. But there are certainly vestiges of their lives together. Although, to be honest, the first iteration of the church they attended in Grand Rapids is also gone. This one burned, although they also attended its successor. So this is the old Fountain Street Baptist Church. If you're familiar with Fountain Street Church today, that was rebuilt following a fire in the 1920s. Incidentally, if this photo looks familiar to you from another Capitol presentation, the William Wright Company that did the Capitol's interiors also did the interiors of the old Fountain Street Baptist Church. So we've got multiple points of connection here with our building. At the Fountain Street Church, They were part of the Young People's League. Keep in mind, youth in this era was not just high school kids. You could have a young people's group or a youth group that included young married people, young adults. She also would lead a women's group, a division within a broader women's ministry that was specifically focused on music and literature. And this is a reminder that even if these were not specifically women's clubs in terms of being the Grand Rapids Women's Club, all capital letters there on those words, there were still a lot of women who were meeting together in this area for study. So this was a group that was coming together specifically to study music and to study literature, not just biblical subjects. Because many women who went to high school, who went to normal school, who went to college by modern standards, they wanted to keep learning. They didn't see their education as being done the second they got that diploma to frame and hang on the wall. Now, in the early 20th century, we also see another family member being elected to office. So her uncle, Thomas McCall, would actually serve 2 terms in the House of Representatives. I would love to know more about their relationship. Was he the one who kind of put her on the path? Did she talk to him and see what it was like to be a legislator? And did this make her think, maybe I could do this someday? No, but we often, I think, can overlook the importance long-term of seeing someone you know do something that may have previously seemed unachievable. You know, when you know someone who serves an elected office, you realize, oh, those people are human too. They're not so different than I am. You know, I've had dinner with this person multiple times and we celebrate Christmas together and so on. So could her uncle have helped put her on that path? Possibly. Now, certainly there was plenty of other activism going on in Michigan and beyond that related to the idea of women serving in government. When we talk about the women's suffrage movement in Michigan, which had multiple iterations as Eva was growing up, we often think about its goal as being achieving the right for women to vote. And that is true that it was part of it. But another part of the broader women's rights movement, what some people would even call first wave American feminism, was the idea that women should be able to participate in government, to serve in office, not just to vote for a guy on the ticket. So when we think about people like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Anna Howard Shaw, all of whom came to Michigan's capitals, a couple of them spoke at the old Capitol across the street. Both Anthony and Shaw spoke upstairs here in this building. These women were arguing not just for access to the ballot box, but for broader access to government, to the ability to hold office. And they are doing that work here in Michigan at these national conventions. But of course, then they pick up and they go elsewhere. These women are national figures. They are traveling across the country and sometimes around the world. It's the women in Michigan, though, who are doing the day-to-day work. Now, you will see a series of images and documents tonight from a scrapbook that exists over in the rare book room in the Library of Michigan. 2 of my favorite images in it are these. These are pictures of Eva and her fellow suffragists, members of the Grand Rapids Equal Franchise Club, who are working in their office in Grand Rapids. And if you've ever worked on a political campaign, you know what this looks like. It is not always big, sexy conventions that make the front page of the newspaper because somebody famous is in town and is going to give a speech. No, you stuff a whole lot of envelopes. You do a whole lot of mailings. You schedule a whole lot of small meetings to try to interact with people and engage and perhaps win converts to your cause. It's not going to get press. It is not going to be headline making work, but this is the actual day in and day out work that brings about change. And Eva did this for years. We know that in the late 1900s, she starts to get involved in suffrage. and she will work within the suffrage ranks for over a decade. And she will do all different kinds of work at all different levels, from stuffing envelopes in the office to, like a good farm girl, driving the suffrage float in the Grand Rapids Homecoming Parade. You can see this is a different image. You may have seen another one that's been used a lot when we talk about Eva. This is the same event, but a different real photo postcard. She also was coming to the Capitol to lobby on the issue, because one way to get something on the ballot was to get the legislature behind it. And this was really the main tactic that women had to use. In the 19th century, suffragists argued that all the legislature had to do was change the law in order for them to be able to vote. And the legislature did this a couple times in the 19th century to make it possible for women to vote in school elections or in municipal elections. But in 1893, the Supreme Court said, wait a second. And they actually said, you can't do this. The Constitution says you cannot create a new class of voters. This can only happen through a constitutional amendment. So in 1907, 1908, women come from all over Michigan, from the Grange, from the Maccabees, from the Women's Club Federation, from all different organizations. And upstairs in the House chamber, they lobby delegates at the Constitutional Convention to include a provision, to include language in the new Constitution enfranchising women. Ultimately, they are not successful, but that doesn't mean you give up. You have to keep pushing. And we know by 1912, Eva was right in the thick of this. In 1912, Chase Osborne calls not one, but two special sessions. He's having some disagreements with the legislature, to put it ever so politely. But we know Governor Osborne was supportive of the suffrage movement. And in this letter, which he sent to Eva in the spring of 1912, he tells her that, well, some of the other women in the suffrage movement may not be so excited about the fact that it took a special session to get the legislature to agree to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot that fall. He says, it'll all be okay. You have my support. We're all going to work hard. And he tells her, no one has done more for this effort than you. And by this time, she is helping lead the way. She is going to serve as a state board member in the Michigan Equal Suffrage Association. She will actually represent Michigan in Washington, D.C. She will go out with some of her fellow suffragists, and she will meet President Wilson and be entertained at the White House. It's pretty extraordinary what this woman does. And ultimately, in 1918, she feels a wonderful sense of accomplishment when finally, Michigan men vote to amend the Constitution to grant women the right to vote. It passes overwhelmingly. Now, suddenly, Michigan has a lot more voters. And the question, of course, instantly becomes, how are they going to vote? What are they going to do? Well, in the next election, which is in April of 1919, they elect a woman. Now, they don't do it by themselves. Men are there voting as well. They elect a woman named Dora Stockman, who was part of the Grange. She had been the state Grange lecturer, which means basically she is the leading public speaker for the Grange, whose business it is to travel all across the state of Michigan on Grange business and to do a lot of continuing education for farmers. So here again, we can see the Grange is working with the Republican Party to put forward a Republican candidate to run for the State Board of Ag. And because she is so well known, thanks to her Grange network, Dora is elected. So just in case you think that the first woman elected to statewide office in Michigan was a recent phenomena, nope, not at all. First woman elected to statewide office in Michigan was in 1919. Now, you will be forgiven if you're thinking, but what did the Board of Agriculture do? Well, one of their chief concerns was running the Agricultural College, that being today's Michigan State University. And this image, as you can see running up the side, is from the MSU archives, which is where Doris Stockman's papers are located. So this is the spring of 1919. In 1920, when it is time for candidates to declare that they are going to be running for office, Eva M. Hamilton, I love this in parentheses, quite small underneath, Mrs. Burt Hamilton, announces that she is a candidate for state senate from the 16th district, the city of Grand Rapids, east of the river. Now, she was not the only woman to run. In fact, there were a number of women running across the United States for legislative seats. And in some states and territories, women had already been serving for decades. The first women elected to their state legislatures were in places like Colorado and Utah, some even back during the territorial era. But in Michigan, she would, of course, make history as the first to win. Now, she would win with a plurality, not a majority. This is an election in which we have multiple parties with strong showings. And in that scrapbook, we can see that certificate of determination of election. So this is the piece of paper with the seal on it that says she has officially achieved that office. How exciting that must have been, and how absolutely terrifying. I think it is all too easy for us who do not serve in public office to think, oh my gosh, how amazing, how fun, how incredible to feel all eyes on you. You're the first. But how terrifying must it be? I dare say, if you had a very frank conversation, even with someone in office today, they would probably tell you that, yeah, it's really hard because when you're the first, everybody knows it. And you are, in some ways, representing far more than your district back home. Because you are new, you are an oddity, you are, some people probably hope, a blip who is going to come and go. You are extremely conspicuous. Everyone is curious to see how you are doing your job. Now, Eva had an advantage coming into the Capitol in that many people knew her here. She had been working on many issues for years, not just the right to vote. For example, she was involved for about a decade working on an issue that was then known as mother's pensions. So mother's pensions were an early form of state assistance for single mothers who were trying to keep their kids together and housed and fed. The alternatives at the time being if their children were taken away, they would have gone to the poorhouse or they would have gone to the state orphanage down in Coldwater. And of course, this was not what moms wanted, but it was hard for women to find work that paid a respectable wage that would allow them to keep a roof over their kids' head and food on the dinner table. It was very difficult to find childcare for them to be able to do something with their kids during the day who may not be old enough to go to school yet, who still need care while mom has to go to work. This is, of course, not simply an old problem. This is still something women struggle with today. But for the first time in the early 20th century, the state of Michigan started to say, you know what, maybe this is a wise investment for us, because maybe if we provide a little bit of support for these moms, we can prevent having to care for those children in other ways. And as so often happens in these situations, number crunchers got out their pencils and they said, well, it costs us this much to house and feed a kid at Coldwater. We can give a mom less than that, and she can keep her kids housed and fed at home. And that's better for everybody concerned. So this was an issue that she worked on for decades. Now, when she comes in to the Capitol on the first day, her first day of session, this would have been January of 1921, it is said that when she walked into the chamber and looked at her desk, which was pre-assigned because they all sat by district number back in those days, that when she walked up to her desk, which was right at the front on the center aisle, talk about being conspicuous, it was covered with flowers. And the press reported that, you know, this was a lovely welcome for the lady senator. A few years ago, when I was down in Ann Arbor at the Bentley, I stumbled across a wonderful set of papers that belonged to one of her suffrage cohorts who lived in Detroit. And in these papers, there's correspondence between Mrs. Suffrage, let's just say, she has a different story we're not going to get into tonight. So we have Mrs. Donor, let's call her, because she was funding a lot of this work. And then we have notes back and forth between Mrs. Donor and Mrs. Lobbyist. Yes, there was a woman hired to lobby not only on suffrage, but a number of quote unquote women's and children's issues. So things like mothers' pensions, things like health and nutrition laws. One of the organizations that she lobbied for was the WCTU, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which was involved in dealing with social issues and also addiction as it related to alcohol. There were 7 or 8 different of these organizations who basically pooled their resources together and said, we're going to pay a woman to go and lobby on these issues to represent us at the Capitol. She was a Lansing woman. She lived just down the street within walking distance. And she writes to Mrs. Donor that the flowers arrived and everyone thought they looked lovely. So we know who those flowers were from. And naturally, of course, some of these articles talk about how she's dressing. There is chatter about, is there a spittoon next to her desk? Did the janitors decide to remove that? How will she be referred to? Will she be Senator Hamilton? Will she be Mrs. Senator Hamilton? How will she be known? Will the other members smoke in her presence? Will they clean up their speech a little bit? It's very interesting. Basically, inadvertently, they're admitting through this press coverage that, yeah, the Senate had been just a little bit of a boys' club upstairs. And I have to wonder how many of the women working elsewhere in the Capitol popped into session those first couple of weeks just to go in the gallery for a few minutes and watch her at work. I have to imagine there was a lot of chatter and a lot of excitement. And it is possible that many of the men who worked in the building did the same thing. After all, Eva was an oddity. She was part of the show now. Now, when we think about this, we also have photos sometimes to illustrate this. Multiple photographs were taken of her in front of the Capitol. And there is all kinds of news coverage that goes far beyond the Grand Rapids papers. Now, the truth is, when you have the legislature as it is, now there are 32 senators at this point, most senators are going to be covered by their home papers. Most of them, unless they are in leadership or do something really extraordinary, are not going to be chatted about too much in Detroit. Maybe they'll appear in the Lansing papers occasionally, but the lady senator is talked about everywhere, in every publication. And often the articles somehow include a reference to her in their title even, because this is news. They want to know how she swears the oath of office even. Now, we have to remember that as a senator, she's not just in this building. She will be going back to her district in Grand Rapids. She will also be traveling with the other senators. This had to be interesting. How did those travel arrangements work now that a woman was part of the group? Because at this time, the legislature would come into session in January, and then at some point, sometimes February, sometimes March, sometimes they do it again in the summer, they would break into committees. And each committee that was attached to an institution, it could be one of the normal schools, it could be one of the prisons, it could be the asylum over in Kalamazoo or Pontiac or Traverse City. The members of that committee would go get on the train and they would all take a trip together to that institution. Now, if you served on a UP committee, oftentimes everybody would just get on the train together and they would kind of chug their way across the UP. And they would, of course, be wined and dined in the process. Because she serves on the committee for the Northern Normal School, that being Northern Michigan, she is part of this trip, if you will. And the UP papers are very interested in learning more about this lady senator. So we have here in this article some interesting bits of conversation. I'm going to actually read some of this to you in case you can't see it clearly on the screen, because I think it's very telling. How does it seem to be in the Senate with all those men? Asked the impertinent reporter of the state senator Eva L. Hamilton of Grand Rapids at the Douglas House yesterday. And that is a typo, by the way, it's not L. Mrs. Hamilton, who was chairman of the Senate Committee of the Marquette Normal School, came to Houghton with other members of the committee and the House committees to join the Senate and House committees at the College of Mines and visit this district. She is the only woman member of the Senate. Not at all strange, said Senator Hamilton. You see, I have 5 brothers, so I have had considerable training in that line. No, I find the members of the Senate all perfectly lovely to me, and we get along just splendidly. Don't we, boys? I love that line. Don't we, boys? This latter remark was addressed to several members of the legislature standing nearby. And why did you want to be a senator? Mrs. Hamilton was asked, the news hound remarking that he simply had to be inquisitive and as curious as a woman is supposed to be. Well, now really, I didn't seek the office. You know how it goes in politics. Upon the solicitation of my friends, I decided to be a candidate. Later it goes on, Mrs. Hamilton, polite, gracious, friendly, and frank, is quite independent and well able to do an act for herself. She even insists on carrying her own grip or briefcase. And one legislator was mean enough yesterday to slip a brick into it. Her fellow salons have a high regard for her ability and the manner in which she has taken a hold of her new duties. She doesn't presume to intrude, yet manages to carry out her own ideas of things and to accomplish results. In other words, she is considered tactful and diplomatic. She refers to her fellow legislators as the boys, and this friendly feeling naturally makes an impression. What an interesting news article. There are so many things in there we could talk about for quite a while. And of course, that's what people did. They talked about her. They wrote about her. They sought her out to get a glimpse of this lady senator. And while being watched and discussed and gossiped about, Eva kept working. She would work on multiple issues. She introduced a bill to create a teacher's retirement system in Michigan. She was not the first legislator to do it. She did not actually succeed in getting this legislation passed, but as a former teacher, she understood this was an important issue, so she tried to carry it forward. She continued to work to improve the mother's pension laws that Michigan had and was able to win an increase. She worked on conservation of natural resources. She felt that it was very important that students learn civics in school and wanted to require that as part of public education in Michigan. She introduced about a dozen bills, roughly half of which were passed. And if I have a favorite image of Eva, it is certainly this one. Also from her scrapbook, this is her standing with several of her fellow members in the governor's office as Governor Grosbeck signs the Mother's Pension Act into law. And I love how proud she looks. All of the guys in there are watching the governor sign the bill. She is staring directly at the camera with a broad smile on her face that screams, "Look at me, look what I just did. I became the first woman in Michigan to author a law, to actually give a woman's touch to the legislative process." What an awesome moment. When I think about Eva, I often think about all of the exciting things she did. But I am also reminded by one particular moment of the sheer courage that she had to have. There was, of course, a lot of speculation about whether or not she would speak on the Senate floor. Now, she, of course, made history simply by being there. She made history as the first woman to stand on the rostrum and to lead the Senate during Committee of the Whole, which, of course, passes around to all the Senate members. There was speculation about if she would stand up and speak. There were many people who felt that women simply did not have the education or the skills to be orators like men did. And to be fair, she waited almost 3 months. She did not rise to address any issue during session in front of her colleagues until March 17th of 1921. And then she gave that day what was referred to by some in the press as her maiden speech. The issue she chose to address, indeed, in some ways, well, the word maiden was an interesting choice. It was not a bill that she authored. This was a bill written by one of her colleagues. And it had to do with, well, to put it frankly, healthcare, but a very specific kind of healthcare. This bill would have required anyone in Michigan applying for a marriage license to require proof of good health before they could obtain one. Now stop for a minute and think about what we're talking about. All those old movies where, oh, you have to go off and you have to do the blood test before you can get your marriage license. We're talking about communicable disease, which was a serious topic that was starting to be discussed in America in the 1920s, particularly following World War I. Senator Hamilton stood to speak on this issue. She stood and she said, "I rise today to speak because I cannot be silent." She said, "No woman wants to believe anything bad of the man she loves, and she will not listen to anything said against him." But she said, all too often, women enter into marriage not fully realizing the consequence of their decisions. And I'm paraphrasing here slightly, but I quote directly. She said, "Too many women commit involuntary suicide as a result." Those are very strong words. Suicide was also not something one discussed publicly on the Senate floor in 1921. But she did. Can you imagine, though, being the only woman in the room, or at least the only woman lawmaker, the only woman on the floor who rises to speak about that? That took courage. And the men serving with her recognized it. It is said that after she finished her comments, several of her colleagues stood up and formed a line next to her desk to come and to shake her hand and to congratulate her on her courage that day. Now, ultimately, that bill did not pass, but she left the chamber feeling that she did her duty. And hopefully that comforted her when she read about herself in every newspaper from Monroe to Marquette the next day, because this was, of course, covered. And I'm sure for some people, it stereotyped her further. I cannot imagine what it was like for her during her term. At one point in time, when she was interviewed, she talked about the responsibility she felt. She realized that she didn't represent just the 16th district. She represented the hopes and the goals and, frankly, the fears of many. And she would talk about it occasionally. She said, "I realize that any mistake I might make will prove costly to other women. By one foolish act, I can undo all that thousands of women have accomplished by their earnest endeavor over a period of years. For that reason, I am proceeding more cautiously, perhaps, than is necessary, and certainly more than any women who will succeed me will find it wise to do." I smile at this because she doesn't seem cautious to me. It makes me wonder, if she did feel she was being cautious, what did she really think? What did she really hope to accomplish? We can only speculate. And it is very true that she did not make everyone happy. Many criticized her. As I said, several of her bills did not pass. She continued to talk about issues many people would prefer not to discuss in public. And it is said by some that the reason she would not win re-election is because she refused to publicly support an issue that many women did want to see passed. That was, okay, what's on the screen? Oh, no, it does still match. Okay, we skipped a slide for a second up here on my computer, but everything's still okay here. That issue had to do with movie censorship. So at this time, the movie industry is still pretty new, and this is pre-code. This is pre-rating system. And there are many women who are part of social clubs who have been reformers and have worked together with her on many issues, these women are concerned about what their kids are going to go down to the theater and see. They want some sort of system that will help them judge what is appropriate for their kids. But Eva said, oh, I can't support that. This is too close to censorship for me. And she takes a beating in the press for it. And ultimately, she will lose her primary. She doesn't even make it to the general election. She will lose her primary bid to a very, very wealthy and well-known furniture manufacturer. And because she is the woman senator, her defeat makes the front page not only of the Grand Rapids newspaper, but also of the Detroit Free Press. But she went home and she kept doing what she had been doing. Being a legislator did not stop her advocacy work. Even before, during, after her term, she would continue to be a part of women's advocacy groups, including the Michigan League of Women Voters, which forms out of what had been the Michigan Equal Suffrage Association. This would become eventually the Michigan chapter of the League of Women Voters, as we know it today. She would, throughout the rest of her life, be continually recognized as a political figure. And frankly, she didn't mind that. Almost a decade later, when she takes a Mediterranean cruise, she is noted as being the only American on the ship, and the press coverage notes that she had been in the Michigan legislature. And by the way, when she visits London on a trip, she is hosted by the Speaker of the English House of Commons, who invites her to the floor with him and introduces her as the lady senator from Michigan. She would be invited back to our capital again 25 years later in 1946. She was invited to come speak to the Senate, where she remained a curiosity, and not only the first, but the only. Yes, that is correct. 25 years later, she was still the only woman who had been elected to the Michigan Senate. And she told those present, "You are using me as a means of conveying to the women of Michigan your regard for them." There are many women who have been trained to occupy positions of public trust. Yet where are they? That question she never quite uttered, but that undoubtedly hung in the air. And by the way, she wasn't just continuing to work in female advocacy groups. She wasn't just continuing to interact with male legislators. She also, once it forms, becomes a member of the National Order of Women Legislators. And she will interact with women here from both political parties. In fact, I believe at some point along the way, it could have been through this organization, or it could have just been through Michigan circles, she becomes known and possibly friends with a woman named Elizabeth Beelan, who would be our third woman elected to the Michigan legislature. And if you're born and raised in Lansing and think, I know that name, she was Lucille's mom. Elizabeth Beelan served one term in the Michigan Senate in the 1930s. Her daughter would go on to become a powerhouse in Lansing city politics and would serve on city council for almost 50 years, if memory serves me correct. No, Timothy is shaking his head no. She was there for several decades, I know, on city, about a quarter of a century. Okay, well, excuse my math. As you all know, I don't do numbers. And so when Eva dies in 1948, Elizabeth Beelan decides she does not want her to be forgotten. So Elizabeth Beelan, the Democrat, gets together with other women in Michigan and probably beyond on both sides of the political aisle and starts to raise money for a portrait, because she understands that Senator Hamilton, still the only woman to serve in the Michigan Senate, needs to be remembered for what she did. And people need to see a woman's face on the walls of the Capitol. They need to know that women can do this work, even if they only have for one term. So she works with many women, and in 1949, the first portrait of Eva McCall Hamilton is officially dedicated in March, on March 16th, Women's History Month as we know it today. This portrait would hang in the Capitol for many years. Ultimately, its condition by the time it was taken down was not fantastic. It was less of a traditional oil portrait than a painted photograph that had been enhanced, if you will. And so the decision was eventually made in the 1990s to commission a new portrait of Senator Hamilton, which is what hangs in the chamber today. If you would like to know more, of course, about Eva, because there is more to her story, I would strongly encourage you to go make an appointment at the Rare Book Room sometime over at the Library of Michigan to see this scrapbook. Many of the materials in tonight's program are things that Elizabeth Beelan collected, I think possibly from Senator Hamilton, to help preserve her legacy, and that she eventually donated to the Library of Michigan. And that portrait that Elizabeth commissioned, well, that portrait would hang the same place the Hamilton portrait we know today hangs, in the Senate chamber, where it is seen by over 100,000 visitors each year. And it is in that same place that in 1953, when the first two Black women to serve in the legislature, Representative Charlene White and Senator Cora Brown, the second woman elected in 1952, when they paused to pose for a photograph, that's where they had their picture taken. Because even though they were Black women born in the segregated South who moved north with their parents as part of the Great Migration, even though they were not farmers' daughters, they grew up in Detroit. Their parents largely worked in service jobs. Cora would go on to go to college at Fisk and HBCU, not Central Michigan. She would come back to Detroit with a degree in social work. She would go on and she would also become a lawyer. She would serve with the Detroit Police Department. She would get her law degree from Wayne State, and she would go on and actually have her own legal practice. Charlene White was a business owner. She finished high school, I believe did some college courses, and opened a florist shop in Detroit. These were two career women in a way that Eva never was. They were very, very different. But I think they also saw themselves as carrying her legacy forward. And that legacy, it's still thought about in this building, not only by those of us who give tours, but by another first, the current Senate Majority Leader. A couple years ago, Senator Brinks, who is also from Grand Rapids, had an event down here in Heritage Hall, just past that wall in the atrium, to unveil a photographic portrait of her that hangs upstairs in the Senate Majority Leader's conference room. Now, this is not a space we normally show on tour, but it is a space where meetings are frequently held. And many years ago, it was decided to hang pictures of the Senate Majority Leaders in there. And because her picture is obviously different from all of the others before it, her staff decided it would be appropriate to have an unveiling ceremony. And when she spoke that day, she said this: "I've grown to believe there is a kinship across time and place shared by those who achieve first. We have an intimate knowledge of the barriers faced, the challenges of the task before us, and the additional scrutiny under which we must perform our duties, simply because who we are is unprecedented. I share that kinship with Eva McCall Hamilton, whose portrait hangs in the Senate chamber. Every day I give her a knowing glance, and she gives me courage in return." So with that, I leave you with this image of Eva McCall Hamilton and hope that next time you see her, she will give you some courage. Courage to stick to an issue that is important to you. Courage to understand that change comes incrementally. Sometimes we go forward and then maybe we feel like we go back, but that change still happened. It's still real. And courage to remember that women have always been a part of this building and what we do here. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions? Mr. Van Acker. That's not accurate. No. That's why you haven't heard it. It's not accurate, but I don't remember. I know the very first woman elected to a state legislature out in Colorado was a representative. I don't remember where the first senator was. Yep. I have a book at home, though. I'll try to remember to look it up. Nope, you're good. Kendall. Yes. Yes. The original is in the collection of the Michigan Historical Museum, but its condition was assessed during the restoration, and it was decided that it was not in good enough shape to be restored and rehung. So at that point in time, as the Senate was talking about launching a project to commission some new portraits, it was decided that one of those three would be a new portrait of Eva. And you'll have to forgive me. I know I seem very casually calling her Eva. This isn't a mark of disrespect in any way. Some of you probably heard me say this before, but when you research somebody long enough, you kind of feel like you get to know them. So to me, she's Eva. Timothy. So if you were in the back of the gallery facing the rostrum, she's on the right-hand side. Any other questions? Anything online? Nope. All right. Well, thank you very much. Before you go tonight, Matt is going to be doing our program in April. So I'm going to turn both microphones over to him so he can give us a preview of what we'll be talking about.
I didn't know till a little bit ago that I was doing this. How about a round of applause for this incredible lady? She's one of the few people that I know that speaks with passion and makes it look flawless and easy. And she does it consistently every time. I'm always awed and so inspired by your presentations, Valerie. So thank you. So I guess I'm here to plug next month's program for us, and it's entitled "Oh, the Dreadful Fields of Battle Over Which It Is Waved." So one guess what that's going to be about. Battle flags. I was actually very honored last summer and was asked to speak at Gettysburg Battlefield on the Michigan battle flags that saw action there as part of the Gettysburg Foundation Sacred Trust Talks. So this is a reprisal of what my kids and my wife, I think teasingly, have been calling my Gettysburg address. So this is a reprisal of the presentation I gave at Gettysburg last July. So it'll cover as much as I can fit in an hour of the Michigan battle flags that saw action there. So if any of you are interested in the subject, we'd be happy to have you join us next month. That's April 22nd at 7 o'clock here in the stateroom. So thank you. Again, thank you, Valerie.